Hidden in nondescript basements across Ukraine, there's a quiet revolution taking place. Wisps of smoke rise from soldering irons as men working by headlamp manufacture the circuit boards that will control Ukraine's FPV drone army. It may seem inconsequential, but Ukraine's ability to produce these critical components domestically is an important turning point in the war, and it cost them only $500 apiece. Being able to use a $500 drone to successfully take out, say, a $4.5 million T-90M Proryev tank or a $200 million S-400 air defense system has rewritten the rules of engagement and provided lessons that no military in the world can afford to ignore. But there's a critical strategic vulnerability. Most of the components these drones use are typically made abroad, particularly in China. In many ways, this reliance on imported components is the weakest link in Ukraine's entire defense supply chain. But now, by homeshoring production of these components, Ukraine is once again innovating in ways that have the whole world paying close attention, especially Russia, which will bear the brunt of these developments and is powerless to stop them. Here's why Ukraine's push for China-free drones is so important, not just for Ukraine, but for militaries around the world. Few military developments in recent history can match the scale and speed of Ukraine's drone transformation. In 2022, Ukraine is estimated to have produced just 3,000 to 5,000 drones in total. By 2024, that number had swelled to 2.2 million, with an estimated 4.5 million produced in 2025. At the upper bound, that's a 900-fold growth in just 3 years. Yet, beneath this manufacturing miracle lies a critical strategic vulnerability. Almost all the drone components were being sourced primarily from China. And for all its many claims about being neutral in the war in Ukraine, China has a comprehensive strategic partnership with Russia and not with Ukraine. In the initial stages of the war, Ukrainian producers purchased almost all of the parts they used in the assembly of their drones from Chinese firms. In fact, in 2023, Kyiv bought 60% of DJI Technology Company's global production of Mavic quadcopters. The Mavic is the industry-standard quadcopter, both for civilian and military FPV use, and its DJI drone family holds up to a 90% share of the US commercial drone market and 80% of the global consumer drone market. More importantly, foreign companies wishing to manufacture their own drones are also largely dependent on China for components. For example, the small lithium-ion batteries produced by contemporary Amperex Technology Company Limited, the world's largest battery maker by capacity. And that's how it was in Ukraine. Now, the production of drones in Ukraine from Chinese components was all working more or less smoothly, until suddenly it wasn't. In June 2023, China moved to restrict its export of long-range drones weighing over 15.5 pounds to both Ukraine and Russia. China claimed these moves were to prevent its drones from being used in the war. However, this justification rings hollow, given that China continued to supply Russia with strategically significant dual-use technologies, such as semiconductors and drone engines, under its no-limits partnership with Moscow. Ukraine doesn't receive the same benefits. Then, to make matters worse, on September 1, 2024, China imposed export restrictions on Chinese-manufactured drones and drone components to Ukraine and Russia, including flight controllers, carbon frames, motors, radio modules, and navigation cameras. This was a serious monkey wrench in Ukrainian drone production. Until then, according to Oleksiy Grebin, there didn't used to be domestic producers of drone components, and nobody was thinking about them. Grebin is the CEO of MotorG, Ukraine's largest producer of electric motors for drones today. Starting in 2023, it took MotorG 7 months to build its prototype and a year and a half to launch mass production. By the end of 2025, MotorG's production was approaching 100,000 motors a month, mostly for FPV drones and the slightly larger fiber optic drones that require frames of up to 15 inches. But MotorG is far from the only Ukrainian company manufacturing drone components domestically. When the Chinese export bans first took effect, Ukraine immediately started looking to its US and particularly European partners for replacements. But that proved to be a far from ideal solution. The bottom line is that China's dominance of the drone component market globally is so decisive that most European suppliers of the necessary drone components don't make them themselves. They're essentially intermediaries for Chinese firms. That creates two problems: limited availability and higher prices. Components are often simply not available, and when they are, they're vulnerable to price gouging. Reports indicate that some component prices have tripled since the Chinese sanctions were imposed. When it comes to drone motors, for example, Grebin says that the EU has none. There are brands, but they're actually made in China. We've been talking with representatives of 3 countries that want to localize their own motor production, but for now, they haven't even made it to the planning stage, he told Kyiv Independent in August 2025. So, Motor G started making their own motors, albeit with components like magnets and voltage testers, which must still in the main be sourced from China. Another Ukrainian company working around Chinese sanctions by producing components domestically is the fiber optic cable-guided FPV drone manufacturer Hasta, which means spear in Latin. Hasta 3D prints the spools and casings for the fiber optic cable. The cable is run through Ukrainian-made lathes, reconfigured with a motor attachment that guides the line smoothly from side to side, similar to how the rack of a typewriter works. According to Hasta's founder, identified only as Andriy for security reasons, Ukrainian production is also developing for thermal vision, controllers, motors, frames. No cameras right now, but we'll have cameras soon too. Now, one of the most crucial components in FPV drones is of course the circuit boards, which serve as the central nervous system of the aircraft. These boards manage critical functions like flight stabilization, power distribution, and high-speed data transmission. They act as the brain of the drone, processing sensor data from gyroscopes and accelerometers to adjust motor speeds in real time, thus ensuring that the drone maintains balance and responds to pilot commands. Like most other components found in FPV drones, these circuit boards were typically sourced from China. Now, as noted at the beginning of the video, they're being made in Ukraine. And they're doing it so effectively that one of the companies producing them has been selected for a lucrative Pentagon drone domination program. In fact, 2 Ukrainian companies were selected among the 25 companies invited to run a gauntlet test in February 2026, the first stage of the Pentagon's process. They selected 11 companies following the gauntlet, including Ukrainian Defense Drones Tech Corporation. The other Ukrainian company running the gauntlet, General Cherry, unfortunately didn't make the cut. The final 11, which also includes 8 US and 2 UK manufacturers, are in line for large-scale orders of their products from the US military. The Pentagon planned to award a total of approximately $150 million in delivery orders after the first gauntlet for 30,000 one-way attack drones, which are intended for delivery to military units over the next 5 months. The selection of the Ukrainian company for the program indicates a high level of trust in Ukrainian drone development. But perhaps more tellingly, its recognition of the strategic importance of these technologies in the international arena. That's because it's not just Ukrainian drone developers that are unhealthily dependent on a supply chain stemming from China. Due to China's overwhelming dominance of drone component manufacturing, pretty much every drone manufacturer everywhere is faced with the same problem. And for Western nations, dependence on the supply of critical components from a major adversary can only be viewed as a major strategic vulnerability. Western drone producers have been compromised by Chinese sanctions and export restrictions in a similar way to Ukraine. In October 2024, for example, China halted the sale of drone batteries to Skydio, the largest US commercial drone manufacturer, over the company's sales to Taiwan. The ban put the dampers on Skydio's production capacity, forcing the company to ration batteries until the spring of 2025 and limiting the supply of US-made drones available to Ukraine in the process. But it's not just drones. China's control over many critical supply chains poses the same, if not greater, strategic vulnerability across many weapon systems throughout the collective West. Take China's near total monopoly on rare earth refining and magnet production, for example. In the US alone, 80,006 components across 1,908 weapon systems rely on materials controlled by Beijing. This dominance allows China to weaponize supply chains, threatening to halt or delay production of critical assets like F-35 fighter jets, Virginia-class submarines, and precision-guided missiles through export licensing and restrictions. New Chinese controls introduced in 2025 in response to President Donald Trump's tariff war require licenses for exports containing even traces amounts of Chinese origin rare earths, effectively blocking foreign-made equipment that uses Chinese technology or materials. These controls have caused price spikes in key elements like gallium, leading to supply chain uncertainty and potential production stoppages for defense contractors. As Trent Emenecker, who leads a team at the Pentagon's Defense Innovation Unit that approves drones for military use, puts it, China could shut the drone industry down globally for a year. This is a national security issue, not just for the United States, but for the global West. As if that wasn't worrying enough, the ongoing global supply disruptions, stemming from Iran's blockade of the Straits of Hormuz, have only increased supply chain uncertainty. Oil prices have risen from around $60 to $70 for the benchmark Brent crude to around $100, causing rising inflation around the world. But disruptions to the supply of other critical materials in defense production, such as aluminum, also mean prices are rising and supply disruptions are practically inevitable. It all points poignantly to one thing: the importance of sovereignty, especially over the supply of critical materials. By greatly reducing its dependence on the supply of drone components from China, Ukraine isn't just innovating, it's greatly enhancing its resilience and ability to keep taking the fight back to Russia indefinitely. And, as we'll soon see, there's very little Russia can do about it. Now, while Russia may be powerless to stop Ukraine innovating, you're certainly not powerless to find out why. Here on The Military Show, we don't just cover the latest military news, we explain why it matters. Subscribe to the channel so you never miss out. Make no mistake, the humble $500 FPV attack drone is a core component of Ukraine's continued resistance. High-end systems like the US's MIM-104 Patriot air defense system tend to hog the headlines, but it's these cheap, highly effective weapons that have truly changed the nature of modern warfare. And theoretically, it shouldn't be that way. On paper, in practically every measure you can think of, Russia dominates Ukraine, whether it's the size of its population, air force or navy, or its manufacturing potential. The sheer oversize of Russia compared to Ukraine should have meant a decisive victory for Russia by now. But that hasn't happened, not even close. And the humble $500 FPV drone is a big part of Ukraine's continued underdog success. According to Major Robert Brovdy, commander of Ukraine's unmanned systems forces, more than 90% of Russian casualties are now inflicted by Ukrainian drones. That's not just personnel he's talking about. These $500 drones have also taken out large numbers of Russia's most prized possessions. Whether it's the S-400 Triumph air defense systems worth $1.2 billion each, T-90M tanks worth $4.5 million each, Beriev A-50 mainstay early warning and control aircraft worth $300 million each, Tupolev Tu-22M3 backfire strategic bombers worth $100 million each, or Scat-450M high-end reconnaissance drones worth $400,000 each. None are safe against these miniature killers. But perhaps most importantly, Ukraine's $500 drones have leveled the playing field when it comes to arguably Ukraine's biggest disadvantage in the war: a shortage of manpower. Following Russia's invasion of Ukraine in February 2022, Ukraine found itself outnumbered both in terms of artillery shells and personnel. So, soldiers on the front line began to modify cheap Chinese drones, turning them into improvised bombers. It proved to be a decisive innovation. As Ignat Buyakin, founder of Ukrainian defense drones, recalls, the country was saved by drones for $500. And that's hardly an exaggeration. Tens of thousands of pieces of equipment and hundreds of thousands of Russian troops have been hit and taken out of action by Ukrainian FPV drones. As the war has progressed, the force multiplying effect of these cheap weapons' ability to knock out systems worth orders of magnitude more has been impossible to ignore for both sides. FPV drones started as flying cameras. Today, they're also precise, fast, and maneuverable strike systems controlled by the operator using virtual reality glasses that create the effect of being in the cockpit of the drone. This control system allows the pilot to perform extremely complex maneuvers, chasing targets or flying into hard-to-reach places like bunker entrances or the gap between a T-90M tank's chassis and turret. Their effectiveness on the battlefield is difficult to overestimate, and the cost-to-kill ratio is much too compelling to ignore. which is why Ukraine and Russia have both scaled up production to industrial levels. After lagging for most of 2023 and 2024, Russia appears to have caught up during the past year, at least in terms of production. If current estimates are accurate, Russia's current production of around 19,000 FPV drones per day, or just below 7 million per year, is probably there or thereabouts that of Ukraine at present. So now the race is on. On both sides of the front lines, both combatants are seeking to increase the numbers and potency of their drone systems. And, as you can imagine, given the importance of these systems on the battlefield, disruption of the supply of drone components is an unacceptable risk. That's why Ukraine's ability to produce China-free drones is such an important development, not just for Ukraine, but for the entire West. As Brovdi explained, given the risks of sourcing components from China, which is unfriendly to us, the main task is to produce them in Ukraine. He adds that the strength of the Ukrainian manufacturer lies in the fact that import substitution has already taken place. Now, Ukrainian innovation isn't just confined to motors and circuit boards. Ukrainian engineers and developers are working hard to try and homeshore the entire drone manufacturing process. That would give them total drone sovereignty, something that only China itself can currently confidently claim. According to Buyakin, when Ukrainian defense drones started production in 2023, all the components were Chinese. Within a year, production of the carbon frames and antennas had also been localized. The company currently produces up to 15,000 antennas per day, underscoring the scale of localization and accumulated experience. But they weren't done yet. By 2025, the company had expanded production to include flight controllers, speed governors, radio modems, and video transmission systems. In fact, all of its components are now Ukrainian-made, except for their cameras. Even then, Buyakin says that the technology for FPV drone camera production already exists in Europe. However, to date, the company has been purchasing them from another Ukrainian company that manufactures them from European parts. Still, this steady incremental production localization is a vivid example of how Ukraine is turning challenges into opportunities and building its technological independence one step at a time. That could be pivotal in the war. The more Ukraine is able to produce its defense requirements itself, the more independent and ultimately sovereign a nation it becomes. That's not just a tactical advantage. Defense sovereignty could give Ukraine vital leverage if and when serious peace negotiations to end the conflict eventually take place. As deputy head of the office of the President of Ukraine and military advisor, Colonel Pavlo Palisa puts it, if we import, it means dependence, and any dependence means a weaker position. That includes dependence on partners. When it comes to low-cost, highly scalable drones, it's already likely to be a case of Ukraine assisting the US and not the other way around, and to remain that way for some time. As Stacey Pettyjohn, director of the defense program at CNAS, recently admitted, we, the US, are really behind. Every single drone here is inferior in quality and costs more than DJI drones. We don't have the industrial base that can produce those right now. Ukraine can rely on some drone support from its European partners, with commitments and joint production ventures on the increase. But it's unclear whether these partners will be able to match Chinese or Ukrainian drones in terms of cost, and whether they'll be able to scale up production to the volume Ukraine requires. According to Ukraine's first Deputy Minister of Defense, Ivan Havrilyuk, Ukraine already produces up to 200,000 FPV drones monthly and must continuously replenish its fleet. But according to Defense Minister Denis Shmyhal, Ukraine needs to produce double that quantity, 400,000 unmanned systems per month, to compete with Russia. That's because Ukraine loses around 10,000 drones per month, and it takes an estimated 3 to 4 FPV drones to achieve a successful kill, emphasizing the scale of what's needed on an ongoing basis. There's also the inconvenient fact that, just like in Ukraine, European or US drones almost certainly contain a host of Chinese components as well. So, they're just as susceptible to supply disruptions and Chinese export controls. In fact, so profound is Chinese dominance of the drone component market that it's debatable whether it's even possible to produce an entirely non-Chinese drone. While Ukrainian defense drones makes carbon frames for drones, for example, the carbon itself is usually from China because it's significantly cheaper. The batteries that power drones are also still largely produced in China, which, as we've discussed, dominates supply chains for battery materials like lithium and rare earth metals. And the entire drone industry worldwide still depends on a narrow set of critical imports, including lithium salts, neodymium magnets, navigation chips, and thermal sensors, where China has an effective stranglehold on supplies. Indeed, according to the Ukrainian Council of the Defense Industry, a trade association for local arms makers, only 5% of its member firms, including many of the biggest in the country, said they didn't use components made in China. By comparison, 28% of member firms reported not using components made in Taiwan, and 40% reported not using components made in the US. Still, for Ukraine, the stakes are much too high to leave such a glaring strategic vulnerability unattended. Given the existential importance of FPV drones to the Ukrainian military, vulnerable supply chains of critical components are unthinkable. The best way to mitigate the risk is by localizing as much of the supply as possible and diversifying sources for the rest. And that's exactly how Ukraine is dealing with the problem, with considerable success already. As recently as 2024, most Ukrainian drones were assembled out of almost entirely Chinese components. By the end of 2025, the share of Chinese parts in Ukrainian drones had decreased to about 38%, according to the Ukrainian Council of the Defense Industry and the Snake Island Institute think tank. That's an impressive dynamic that underscores the innovation, intensive work, and investment underway in Ukrainian domestic drone component production. And Ukraine's partners are taking serious note. Many of them are taking active de-Chinization steps of their own, as well as friendshoring supply chains to friendlier nations where possible. The EU's Critical Raw Materials Act, for example, aims to reduce the EU's dependence on imports and develop its own extraction and processing capacities of these materials. And like in so many other fields, Ukraine's partners are gleaning the benefits of its ingenuity in localizing drone production. Meanwhile in Moscow, Russian President Vladimir Putin looks on anxiously. There's basically nothing he can do to stop Ukraine's budding defense sovereignty. More and more of his prize systems are being destroyed by $500 Ukrainian drones, and whatever indirect control he had over their production volumes via China is being steadily eroded. More concerning for Putin is that his FPV drone assembly lines are just as dependent on components from China as everyone else, if not more. For now, Russia's strategic partnership with China offers loopholes and backdoor deals that buffer it from most of the strategic risk. But if anything should go pear-shaped with that arrangement, Russia's drone production would be in big trouble. And Ukraine has a serious head start in plugging that rather glaring vulnerability. And speaking of Russians in big trouble, check out this video about how the Russian military is about to collapse. Thanks for watching.